Welcome back to another episode of Talent Talks Success Series in partnership with the Business Post. At Phoenix, we're extremely fortunate to have the opportunity to meet exceptionally talented individuals from some of Ireland's most exciting companies on a daily and weekly basis. Following on from our January episode with Aidan Corbett from Wayflyer, in this episode, we were delighted to have the opportunity to chat with Patrick Pinschmidt, General Partner and Co-Founder of venture capital fund MiddleGame Ventures. As always, joined by my co-host, Ruth Lyndon.
And Patrick is a formidable character, insightful, personable, and really interesting to listen to. Just to give a little bit more background, Patrick is general partner, as Ed mentioned, and co-founder of venture capital fund MiddleGame Ventures. MiddleGame Ventures, they invest in early stage growth businesses focused on fintech innovation from seed to Series B funding rounds with a pan-European focus. It's 40 plus companies across 10 plus locations. Interesting to learn that a really strong Irish focus, and Patrick talks about this during the podcast. They have invested in the likes of Wayflyer and Payslip, which many of you will have heard of. Patrick, he is from the US. That's very obvious from his accent, but he's no stranger to Ireland, having spent many summers in his parents' hometown of Herbertstown in County Limerick.
Yeah, Patrick, really interesting guy, obviously doing a lot of positive investment in Ireland and further afield across Europe. Some amazing success stories already behind the MiddleGame Venture brand, with lots of really interesting nuggets for anyone that is looking to start a business and maybe get venture capital funding, but also those that are looking to create a successful career ahead of them. Ruth, what did you think?
Really, really interesting. I mean, Patrick himself, his career path is so not maybe what you typically would think. And he goes through all of this, like from the big investment bank names through to the US Treasury Department and then into a VC company. So loved it. There was a real human element to it. And I think as well, when he talked about, we asked the question around the key ingredients or what attracts you when you're looking at companies to invest in, what you watch out for. And ultimately the human element, that the senior management team and the value of that over maybe the product or concept itself is what they put more weight on. So just a really insightful, interesting conversation from a very personable man. Everybody make sure to listen out for our rapid fire round. At the end, we get to ask Patrick some really good questions, and he also gives some really good advice to budding entrepreneurs.
Great. Hope you all enjoy.
So let's jump right in and find out more about the man behind MiddleGame Ventures. Patrick, you are very, very welcome. We are delighted to have you with us here today. A question we kick off all our podcast episodes with is, what does success look like to you?
Thank you very much, Ruth and Ed, for having me on. That's a very high level question, but let me try and tackle that as best I can. I think when I think of success, it's really not about money per se. It's really about kind of what motivates me and deriving satisfaction from that. And I think, frankly, it's making an impact, feeling that I'm contributing to something bigger than kind of my day-to-day existence. And particularly when I can make an impact on an organization, a new startup, by leveraging a unique talent that I have, or a talent that my partners have, or providing introductions, and just seeing that growth then materialize. So kind of that's why VC venture capital is very interesting, and why I love it. It's it's being able to get involved with talent, with very driven entrepreneurs, and help in a small way to help facilitate that growth.
Interesting, Patrick, and I guess from our perspective, you've held a number of different types of positions and careers, almost from high level investment banking to obviously public service in the US Treasury Department. Has your motivations changed over the years, going from one to another to now obviously VC?
No, I mean, I think it's really fundamentally all about working with great talented people. And I've had the fortunate opportunity throughout kind of my 3 different careers, so to speak, of really being engaged with driven, motivated people who like to make things happen. And to some extent I feed off of that energy. And that being said, it's also, having a variety in what I do during the day. And with the advantage of VC, I think, is you have many different touch points across multiple companies, and multiple companies at very different stages of their growth. And tying that back to what's happening in the financial services landscape today, where you're seeing this huge transformation because of digitization, and the impact of shifting provision of financial services, the use of financial services, the changes in the incumbent financial services market is creating this huge opportunity for entrepreneurs. And so kind of putting that together, kind of the work that I do on the VC with what's happening in the fintech ecosystem, it really is it's a very motivating and exhilarating backdrop to be engaged in, particularly today.
Sure. And I guess when we speak to successful people like yourself, there's more than likely an end goal in mind. I'll be successful when X happens. Do you see that as a traditional kind of retirement plan for you, sitting on a beach with a cigar, or what is that kind of end goal look like for you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess unfortunately my golf game is not that good, and frankly has gotten worse over the years. So I think I'm going to have to find time to do something else. And I think when I think about retirement, and hopefully that's ways away still, but I hope it looks very much like what I'm doing today, but with a pivot to nonprofit social impact. There's a lot of energy and there's a lot of need for mentorship and entrepreneurship and solving some of society's problems through a venture model where you're finding driven young people or people in retirement who are coming up with new innovations that are not driven by profits, but are driven by improving society. And I think when I think of the next phase, that's something I really want to be involved in and kind of leverage some of the contacts and the skills I gained in venture.
Really interesting. Just Ed mentioned there about your career pathway, Patrick, and it has been somewhat unusual in the sense that it has gone from some of the world's leading very busy investment banks, fast paced, to public service with the US Treasury Department, and then obviously into the VC space. Just going from the high flying investment banks to public service and the US Treasury Department, how and why?
Yeah, so it is kind of looking back on it, it is sort of interesting, and I feel very lucky to have had the experiences I had. I mean, in college, I was a history major, so I don't think anything indicated, 20 odd years ago that I'd spend my entire career in financial services. But I got very fortunate coming out of school to meet a mentor, who sort of took me on board, largely because I was a good writer at that stage. I didn't really know anything about numbers. I did know my way around an Excel spreadsheet, but it was a very interesting space where essentially my job was to understand and analyze the publicly traded financial services marketplace with a particular focus on investment banks, asset managers, online brokers, exchanges, and financial technology companies. This was way before, so I'm dating myself now. This was before they were called Fintech. And I had the experience of doing that through the financial crisis at Morgan Stanley, which was just eye-opening and obviously frightening and exhilarating and crushing all at the same time. But you're working in this institution that is in the middle of a lot of havoc that's being reaped on the marketplace. And you're engaging with investors on the outside, you're engaging with the management team on the inside, and you really realize no one really knew what was going on. And to me, that was a very foundational learning that there are a lot of weaknesses in our financial system in terms of transparency, in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of financial reporting. And to me, that sort of rekindled my interest because I'd gone to college in Washington, D.C., and I always had kind of this public policy bent in me. And sort of coming out of that crisis with Barack Obama being elected, finally a Democratic administration in Washington, it gave me the opportunity to raise my hand for an appointment at the Treasury Department, where I was able to really get involved in helping address some of the shortcomings in the financial crisis and implementing some of the rules coming out of the financial crisis in the U.S. And unlike some of the financial systems in Europe, U.S. has kind of a hodgepodge Byzantine regulatory structure where you have different regulators regulating different types of companies based on whether you're a bank, asset manager, or a trading firm, or what type of services you're providing. And it's very easy for kind of information to fall through the cracks. And it's very difficult for regulators to look across the system and understand, what are the potential financial risks that may be creeping up and posing a systemic risk to the market functioning. So the office that I helped start up and then lead at Treasury was called the Financial Stability Oversight Council. And essentially it was chaired by the Secretary of Treasury, and it brought together all the regulators across the US financial system with a collective responsibility to monitor, identify, and respond to risks to financial stability. And setting this up, there was no playbook. We just had the legislation that was written in the law, and we were doing everything for the first time, and a lot of conversations, and I found it absolutely fascinating because I was using a completely different side of my brain, and I just loved it, and I think we did a lot of good things. And it was a lot of hard work. And I think between 10 years as a research analyst and then my time in government, I tell people that explains my prematurely gray hair. But I wouldn't trade those experiences today for anything.
And just on that, Patrick, to go from that world, research, and analyzing, looking at the legislation, how do we make it, turn it into real life to safeguard this industry? How do you go from that to actually, let's go into, co-founder of a VC company? Totally different again, different pace, I'd imagine, different side of your brain being engaged again. What led to that?
So I kind of, my collective experience, again, my entire career was in financial services, and I feel fortunate to have the perspective of, on the sell side research side, working with the incumbents, the big financial services players in the marketplace. And then on the regulatory side, obviously thinking about sort of the rules of the road and building a more robust foundation and infrastructure for the financial system. And given those two experiences, I saw the weaknesses in the system and kind of also the energy and the budding up of the technology and the potential solutions for technology. And these are not just solutions that help consumers. These are solutions that help counterparties in terms of understanding their risk. These are solutions that help regulators in understanding exposures and providing better information. And so it was very clear to me that the energy going forward was going to be in fintech, and I very much wanted to find a way to get involved in that ecosystem. And when I look at my experience, it's not necessarily traditional to fintech. And fortunately, the two partners I ultimately became involved in, they had an operational experience and they had a venture investing track record. But what I brought to the table was complementary to them with my background. Because frankly, you're not going to be a successful fintech if you can't engage with larger incumbent financial services companies, whether that's selling to them or partnering with them, or you can't work in a helpful and compliant manner with the regulatory system. Yeah. And so, it was through kind of a series of conversations after coming out of Treasury that I met my two partners, Pascal Bouvier and Michael Meyer. And, they sort of agreed, look, you've got an interesting background that complements us. We're kind of in the process of starting our journey and launching this fund. And, I was several years past 40, and, I realized I was at that time in my life where, I wanted to kind of lean in and take a risk. And, it was a calculated risk. I think we had a very good team and we all felt very confident in one another. And but still, it took several years to get the fund off the ground. And fast forward to 2019, we launched the fund, and kind of the rest has been very busy.
And for those that maybe aren't as familiar with MiddleGame Ventures, can you give us the elevator pitch?
Yeah, so I think in terms of, I don't know if this is a pitch, but just giving that overview. So we're a fintech only fund, and we're focused solely on European early stage startups. We invest from seed through Series B, and we have a sort of a very much a focus on B2B enabling technologies. We look at our competitive advantage as we obviously have a broad network in the US, whether it's with incumbents or other investors, and we have a broad network in Europe. And I think particularly for early stage companies who are launching in what is a global business, that can be very important. So we look at our network as a key differentiator, both geographically and experience-wise, as well as we're very hands-on. I mean, my partners have been around this for a while. They're both in their 50s. They've served as CEOs and they've served as founders. So the three of us, we take board seats. We get involved. Sometimes for better or worse. Not all founders like that hands-on engagement, but we think there's a lot to be learned, and we don't, by no means we're intrusive or anything, but we want to be helpful, and we look at our role as providing more than funding, but helping that company scale in a logical way that maximizes the market opportunity ahead of them.
Great, and Patrick, it's interesting just to pick up on something you said earlier around finding a mentor. A lot of highly ambitious individuals or successful people tend to look back at the mentorship that they got from someone. When you think back at that mentor individual, what did they instill in you, or what did they teach you over a period of time that really kind of transformed your career path?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think the biggest thing I'm thankful for with some of the mentors I've had is patience, because you don't necessarily start off knowing everything and necessarily performing at the best level right off the bat. And particularly with someone from my background, where I didn't have a lot of financial services experience, it took a certain amount of patience and a certain amount of confidence to bring someone on. And I look at that today as, when I think about whether it's mentoring or, getting involved in the startup, either as an investor or just trying to be helpful, is, they might not have all the right tools in place, but if there is that edge that indicates that there's something really, there's a lot of potential there, and the ability to take feedback and learn, that's the most important thing. But I think in mentorship is a two-way street, and I think there are a lot of people who may be transactional on their mentoring on both sides, and I think if that's the approach from the onset, that very much becomes apparent, and it's very damaging to both sides. So I would encourage people to spend time seeking out a good mentor, having a good boss, because you want someone who can promote you, who will kind of lift you out from under the shadows and kind of encourage you to go outside of your comfort zone, because that's really how you learn. It's doing things that aren't necessarily innate and are not necessarily consistent with your background, and that's how you open up new skill sets and meet new people and really expand your horizons.
It's interesting that you say mentorship should be a two-way street. Typically, you have someone who has been there, done that, and can bring a lot of value to the table, with someone who doesn't feel necessarily totally equipped to take on the world in some areas. How do you make that a two-way street? If someone is inexperienced or doesn't have the experience of a mentor, what can a mentor get from that relationship as well?
So I think a mentor needs to kind of go into it with eyes wide open that, it's not going to happen overnight, number one. And that's why it's not a transactional experience, because it's not just, having a call every 3 weeks or a coffee every month or so, and then you're kind of done. I mean, there are situations like that that perfectly work fine, but depending on the nature of the mentorship and kind of what the key growth areas of the person you're mentoring are, it's definitely kind of a long haul. And I think for a successful mentorship, you want that mentor to feel empowered to really, bring their network forward in a way that provides the maximum value. And I think, if the mentor is sort of holding back and saying, well, I'm going to just do these coffees and kind of leave it at that, you're leaving value on the table in terms of potential learnings. And I think that's just, something that a mentor needs to understand at the beginning as they go into this, as to, are they really prepared to lean in and kind of, if they see promise here, and kind of deliver on multiple fronts.
Patrick, can I just ask, as a matter of interest, is it something that given your experience, is it something that you're approached about much to act as mentor?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't use the formal term mentor. I mean, we get a lot of calls and inquiries about, startups, and, a lot of times, for whatever reason, they won't be startups that we'll necessarily invest in. But yet, the founders want to come to us and ask questions and kind of, want help with their pitch, and, reviewing their deck, or maybe making introductions. And that is something I'm always happy to do. I think particularly here in the Irish ecosystem, because I think it can be hard for a lot of Irish early stage companies to kind of, get those linkages that help them grow their business. So yes, I think it's more on an ad hoc basis. And I think also, we try to, we formalize that. We've done accelerators, pan-European accelerators, which are very rare in the venture space, where we bring in 12 early stage companies that we're not necessarily investing in. But this was pre-pandemic, where we'd spend 3 weeks in Luxembourg and Dublin, just doing a venture boot camp, explaining what venture investors look at, explaining what the key markers of success are for when you're building your team, through finding product market fit to scaling the sales cycle, and how that looks like, and what are the key markers. And we love doing that pre-pandemic. We tried it virtually last year. It was, I think it was very useful, but it wasn't the same experience with having everyone in the room. And we've also done something like that here in Ireland, at the beginning of 2020, right before the world changed, where we did a EI Fintech week, where we worked with about 9 different Fintech companies. And, again, I think there's such an information gap out there between entrepreneurs and venture investors, and anything we can do to arm entrepreneurs with more information about, what are the key markers of success, and what are the things they need to be thinking about as they grow their business, is generally very well received, because there aren't a lot of textbooks that go into that, and I think it's been proven very useful.
That's phenomenal. That's an amazing thing to do.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I guess the next question from my side would be, you've mentioned the why in terms of your industry focus of investments, but why Europe, why Ireland specifically? What did you see in those markets that really excited you guys?
Yeah, we've been we've been very busy as a fund. We've done 12 investments over the past 2 years, and that pace is going to continue. We're raising a successor fund now for our kind of what we call our Series A fund, and we're actually looking to we're in the process of actually launching now a seed fund that will have a strong focus on the Irish market, and then ultimately pan-European, and that we expect to close in the next couple months. It will allow us to go very early in identifying very early stage founders and really helping them scale, because we see a lot of energy now, early pre-Series A, at that seed funds level, where companies are graduating from angel investments and looking for that first institutional round. And we want to really be active in that space, both in Ireland and the rest of Europe.
Can I just ask one question, Patrick, as a matter of interest? How does the female entrepreneur community compare in the fintech space from your experience versus their male counterparts? Do you see a marked difference that there's more male entrepreneurs in this space, or how have you found it?
Unfortunately, I think there's still a lot of work to be done on that front. I think female entrepreneurs are underrepresented in fintech, like many other technology verticals, and I think, particularly in the U.S., minorities in general are also underrepresented. I mean, you go to a lot of these conferences, and it's people, white males, and it's so there's a lot of work to be done there in terms of diversity and inclusion. And I think the best way to do that is encourage and open doors for more females and minorities to get involved in startups coming out of college, and to get that entrepreneurship bug. And it's not necessarily launching your own company when you're 22 or 23, but it's working for a startup, getting that in your blood. And if that startup's successful, or if it's not, you kind of come away with that experience, and it provides the building blocks to hopefully get involved and do your own thing. We've been fortunate to partner and invest with Fidelma McGurk at the CEO of Payslip, who's an absolute dynamo. Yep. And Payslip's a Westport-based payment middleware that essentially solves a really important pain point for a lot of international companies that have multiple payroll providers in different countries, and as a result of that, just have this incoherent cacophony of different data points and different data providers, and have no way of kind of streamlining that middleware data layer. And Payslip is solving that immediate pay point. And what Fidelma's vision is once they kind of solve that immediate pain point, there's a huge opportunity there to provide additional financial services on top of that, through connecting with APIs and having a current language, a common language, so you can add new services for employees and employers on top of that. So Fidelma, obviously she came from an interesting background where she was helped scale a company before, but she is should be a role model for a lot of entrepreneurs, whether you're female or male.
Yeah, no, she's fantastic. She actually was a lead entrepreneur for an EI and KPMG backed program called Going for Growth, which supports and encourages exactly that, female entrepreneurship. So I was lucky enough to be on the first and second round of that program, and actually in the most recent Going for Growth round, Fidelma was my lead entrepreneur, and I agree, she is absolutely phenomenal. She happens to be female, she's a mom, she's a parent, she's also just phenomenal at what she does. So yeah, like initiatives like that are super, and more of them. Paula Fitzsimons heads it up, does amazing work, and I agree, whether, as you say, interesting, it's not just a female piece, it's the minorities as well. But yeah, more of that, please.
Yeah. Definitely. And I think when you look at the range of successful investments that you've made, obviously Payslip is going very well, and obviously I know your involvement in the likes of Wayflyer, which have been a huge success in recent times. When you look at the leadership team, is there a common ingredient that makes those businesses successful, maybe outside of what just the product is? Is there a common trait between those leadership teams that you've seen that you need to really make a high growth business successful?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It really gets to the core of this. And I think as a fund, we recognized early on and decided early on that we would rather partner with and invest an off the charts management team with a sort of a B kind of business plan or business proposition than the other way around. So you can have this amazing business plan, but if you're somewhat you're just kind of an you're good management team, but not top flight. That to us is less compelling than going for the visionary leader, absolutely off the charts, who knows what they're doing. And the reason is, startups are 7 to 10 year. I mean, our relationship with startups are kind of 7 to 10 year marriages, and there are going to be many twists and turns. And the business model is going to evolve. There'll be new competition. There'll be new technology, and it's very unlikely, whatever your vision is today, that's going to survive over kind of the twists and turns. And if you have a management team that can kind of take their lumps and their bruises and still have that fortitude to kind of see it through and put good people around them and grow that business, that's much more important than having a fully refined, bulletproof business plan right off the bat. So again, we lead very strongly with the team and confidence in the team, and we'll take that any day over the best business plan in the world.
And it's great to hear. Obviously the best, in inverted commas, products in the world never launch, right? The best management teams seem to create successful businesses all over the world. From your perspective, I'm sure when you're going through a VC investment process, there's competitors maybe at the table pitching for the business as well, getting under the skin of how the management team interact and operate together. How do you do that when you're essentially an outsider looking into the business, trying to invest? Is there any particular process that you guys do to assess how strong that management team is?
Well, I can't reveal all our tricks, but
just some.
But so it's interesting. I think that the obviously, there are things on paper, and there are things that kind of come through superficially with, like, well, what type of team is that person surrounded themselves with? Are they bringing in very strong players? And how they present the kind of the vision for the company, and that's all important. But look, we're going to talk to prior employers, prior partners. We won't go back and talk to secondary school teachers, but we're going to talk to a lot of people. We're going to talk to customers. We're going to look at the technology. Sometimes if we don't understand the technology completely, even though we are technology investors, we must confess that some of this gets way too weedy for us to even comprehend. We'll hire an outside expert to give it a look. So we'll do a lot of that, but I think the really only gut check is to try and spend a lot of time with the founder and have multiple people do that. And in terms of Irish companies, that's a little bit easier because I'm here on the ground. Obviously, in the midst of COVID, that was a little bit more difficult because you're doing everything over Zoom. And our partnership used to have a model where a partner would champion a company and then kind of bring it to the other partners, and there'd be kind of an up or down vote. And we've sort of since inverted that, where we'll do at the very beginning, there'll be obviously a partner who has the initial relationship and has the conversations and feels pretty good about it. But earlier, before the deep dive due diligence, we'll expose that CEO and the management team to the rest of the partnership, so everyone can kind of have that extra time in front of that founder and kind of just get a sense check as to who we're dealing with. But I'd say conversely too, it's very important for the founder to do the same, because again, it's a 7 to 10 year marriage with a venture fund, and while we do our homework, the entrepreneur should do their homework too, and call companies that the investor has invested in previously. Make sure that you would feel comfortable working with this team, because it is being an entrepreneur is a lonely existence, and you really want to have partners who you can rely on beyond the funding to help scale the business.
I just think it's really refreshing, and it makes sense that it is so driven by the personal relationship. Like, it is a marriage for 7 to 10 years that you can't really get out of. So I think it's great to know that, and that it works both ways. Exactly, that once you're in, and if you don't get on, if there isn't a kind of a personal relationship there as well as a business one, it just isn't going to yield the results it could. So it's similar in our world. And in search, we can find someone with all the technical skills and they're the best for the job from a technical perspective, but if there's no rapport, there's no culture, similarities, is just not going to work. So interesting and refreshing, I think, to hear that it's the same in your world. As you mentioned, you get to work with and engage with some of, Ireland and Europe's leading budding, entrepreneur CEOs. Have there been particular learnings or lessons that you've taken from these ladies and gentlemen that you have implemented in your own business life?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, look, fundamentally, I'm a little selfish in the sense that I love, engaging with entrepreneurs because they just have a passion and a drive that I find exhilarating, and I derive energy from it. So obviously that doesn't necessarily help the entrepreneurs, but it makes me feel good, so I'll take it. But I think that's sort of table stakes for a lot of entrepreneurs. But I think that the challenge is wedding that passion and that drive to that discipline on the business side. And that's not always the case. Fortunately, it's the case in the companies that many of the companies we've invested in, all the companies we've invested in Ireland. It's that discipline to get things done. To hire the right people and be relentless about growing the business and holding people accountable. And so you could kind of have that, you have your North Star in terms of your business, you have your passion for your product, you have this great enthusiasm, but that doesn't mean anything if you don't have the ability to kind of be a strong operator, to get involved into the weeds, to kind of have the key metrics from week to week, day to day, that actually is the blocking and tackling of growing a business. And it's incredibly difficult to find those two together. And I think this goes back to your prior question about what we look for in founders and team. It's, I think again, that passion is generally a given and we love it, but it's balancing it with that operational know-how. And, look, candidly, there's some CEOs who don't necessarily have that, but they have a number two or a co-founder who can kind of bring that to the table. So then that kind of goes back to the team and the confidence level of that CEO to bring people around him or her that can really help grow that business.
An interesting one that I'm interested to hear your thoughts on. What is the top piece of advice you would give your 20-year-old or 30-year-old self?
Oh, so I guess some of this may have come across in the conversation, but I think my key learning is careers are not linear. It's while on the one hand we like to think about startup success, those that succeed, it's linear. Careers are not always like that, and and it's important to recognize that sometimes you have to go sideways in order to start to go up again. And that can be in terms of taking a different job, or that can be in terms of taking on different roles, or, I think more fundamentally, it's in terms of, raising your hand for an opportunity that is not necessarily in your comfort zone, but is a key need of the organization where you can add value. And so I think, where I've had growth in the past, it's been kind of doing stuff that has been outside my comfort zone, and it's opened me up to things I didn't realize I'd be good at, and it's it allowed me to interact with other people and other mentors, and then I guess the final sort of element there is and this goes particularly when you're in a new job or a new project, it's the halo effect is very real, and that first task you're charged with, you absolutely want to, hit the cover off the ball. I mean, and because that will accrue to your benefit, and you'll be perceived as someone who can get something done, and that leads to a lot of more responsibilities and a lot more tasks. And If you flub it, it kind of puts you in a hole, and it's very hard to dig your way out of it. So I think just kind of being cognizant of that, particularly in a new role or a new job.
Okay. And your final piece of wisdom, what advice would you give to budding entrepreneurs?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of advice, and I also I'm humble enough to know that entrepreneurs know a lot more about their business than I do. And, as a venture capitalist, we can only really support them. And, we're not the ones driving the business. We're not the ones making decisions. But, I guess this kind of comes from the standpoint of watching a lot of entrepreneurs and kind of seeing what works and what doesn't work. But, I think first thing first is really just focus on your business, live it and breathe it. And, and there's kind of a continuum there in terms of where you are in the phase of your business growth. I think the earlier the startup, if you're just getting started, the focus is on the team and the idea, and then the technology. And as you move later down that road, as you have your first customers, it's about market size, unit economics, and then the sales plan and the ability to grow. So there really is that kind of technology first, product second, product market fit third, and then it becomes all about scaling the sales cycle in terms of growing. And that's kind of the framework, because I think we talk to a lot of entrepreneurs who start talking about sales before they have the product ready or the product market fit or they have a team. And I think it's really important to not overwhelm yourself and kind of focus on the sort of the first matters first, and the other things will logically grow out of that. And I think particularly with entrepreneurs in financial services, there's something to be said for, financial services is a highly regulated industry. You're touching other people's money. You're dealing with the foundations of the monetary system, and depending on what sort of part of the value chain you're playing in, if something goes wrong, there are very few second chances in financial services from a regulatory and compliance perspective. So, that common mindset on a lot of, startups, and again, this wouldn't be advice, the advice would be different for a non-financial services startup, but you have to be less careful in financial services with the mantra of, move fast and break things, because it's very important to kind of do it in a compliant way, particularly if you're trying to sell into financial services firms, and they're going to look at you very skeptically if you don't have your own house in order. But I think in terms of sort of the general kind of as you're launching a venture as an entrepreneur, there's just a lot of blocking and tackling. You really need to go out there and find a good team. Leverage the homegrown resources, network, look out for mentors. Obviously, Enterprise Ireland provides great support for a lot of early stage entrepreneurs. But you really do need to network in a strategic and broad-based way. And I found this personally, and I've seen this in other entrepreneurs, is sometimes you kind of have a very narrow approach to networking, and you'd be surprised as sort of the people you think will provide the most value end up providing the least, and the people you don't expect much from provide the best connections. And that's tremendously important no matter what stage you are as a startup, and particularly in an ecosystem such as Ireland, where you really want to leverage what's in front of you and find people who can kind of connect you to other resources. And I think we talked about this before, and then I think in terms of engaging with venture capitals, and actually the first question is, do you need venture funding? And frankly, venture funding is very expensive. It can be dilutive, and it's not necessarily the best option for many startups, whether it's the type of business you're getting in, or if you have an ability to self-fund it. And so venture funding really only makes sense when you really do want to put the pedal to the metal and grow that top line faster than you would otherwise be able to grow it. And clearly in fast moving technology businesses, that is there's a requirement for that. In other types of enterprises, it might not be less, it may be less relevant, but it is a foundational question in terms of, as you're building a business, is venture right for me, and what stage of the growth of the company is that an option? And the answer should be and isn't always yes.
Interesting.
Patrick, just when it comes to high growth businesses scaling, where does talent come into, let's say, the list of potential risks? Accessing the right talent that will allow that business to grow, specifically even in the Irish market. Venture capital is growing hugely, and obviously investments in Irish businesses is growing hugely in what is essentially a pretty finite pool of talent. Do you see that as a risk for high growth ambitious businesses here?
Yeah, I mean, it's a risk, and it's a definite pain point right now in the marketplace. And I guess the question is this cyclical or secular? Because clearly there are a lot of high growth startups within Ireland. Everyone's chasing a limited pool of talent. So it's kind of being flexible and finding the right talent. And, I think, clearly, we spend a lot of time interviewing different potential candidates at different companies, and helping source those. And I think in this environment in particular, you can never have too few resources, whether it's people like yourselves, or contacts, or your broader network, to kind of source the right people. I think the risk too is, particularly for early stage startups, is you bring in the wrong person, and that just sets everything back. And it's very hard to disentangle, and then you're starting from zero again. So I think it's very important to kind of do it systematically, to have a vision for what the role is, and to look as broadly as possible for that right person to fill that role. But yeah, I mean, it's been a challenge for a lot of companies in a lot of different phases of growth right now. And it's kind of something you just have to kind of slog through, and you really shouldn't compromise on who you bring on board, because if you're a startup with 15, 20 people and you kind of have one or two bad apples, that can really have a very negative impact on the entire enterprise.
Some really, really interesting insights there, Patrick. Thank you so much. This is exactly why we do this podcast. But before we let you go, we have our rapid fire round where you're put on the hot seat, and we get to know you in a little bit more detail. So first question, best business book you've ever read?
Okay, so as I noted, I was a history major, so I must confess I do not read a lot of business books. I did when I got my MBA. But I've not, been purchasing the 300-page business books lately. So what's on my bookshelf, I mean, on my bedside counter right now, is actually an interesting book. It's Ron Chernow's book on Ulysses S. Grant. So I read a lot of biographies, and the reason I sort of highlight this as a business book is U.S. Grant was the general that won the Civil War for the Union Army, and then after the war became president, and he was a two-term president. While sort of universally recognized as a great general, he also was viewed as a man with his own personal demons, and a suspect politician with suspect ethics. And I think what this book has proven to me is the latter was certainly untrue. He had a very sound moral compass, and he obviously a very great general, but he was terrible in business. And he had many different entrepreneur, kind of launched different businesses throughout his early life, failed in everything. Several years before he took command of the Union Army, he was basically selling firewood outside a camp. He'd been a failure in a lot of things, but he did have this innate conviction and confidence, and obviously an immense ability both on the battlefield and then in politics as president, that kind of was sort of finding his match with the moment. And I think that's sort of, not to kind of really extend this analogy, but that's sort of what a lot of entrepreneurs are about is, you can be a great entrepreneur, but if you're not necessarily matched with a moment in terms of the marketplace or the technology, you could be too early, or you could be too late. So I think with the US grant, and while, I'm perhaps taking liberties here calling it a business book, I think there are a lot of lessons there for as you think about kind of entrepreneurship and starting a new business and what it requires to be successful and how you overcome failure. Super.
Second, what podcasts are you listening to at the moment besides Phoenix Talent Talks, obviously?
Yes. So I would say I like Lex Sokolin's Fintech Blueprint. He's a very prolific, but I'm going to add a twist to this because, and this goes back to my prior life. I spend a lot of time listening to transcripts of earnings calls of publicly traded companies. And, I know that probably sounds horrendously boring on the surface, but it provides a very good way to learn about what's happening in the financial system. What are some of the key drivers at publicly traded companies, whether your exchange or investment bank, your publicly traded fintechs, understanding what the needs are in the ecosystem and some of the gaps. And it ties directly into kind of, obviously the broader landscape, but also kind of some of the tools and skills and products that are going to be on the horizon as needs for the incumbent financial system.
Interesting. Number 3, what is your one daily non-negotiable?
I guess at the end of the day, I like to spend some time reading, unfortunately, more too often than not, it's on my iPad, and I think my eyes are beginning to suffer. But I do like sort of seizing some downtime to spend some time reading at the end of the day.
Super. Number 4, pet peeves in business.
I think there are 2 of them. People who don't take accountability, who don't own it, and that could be for good or for bad. And I think the second is sloppy work and lack of attention to detail. And that's just frustrating because it can undermine the perception of what's being presented to me, even if there are no mistakes in other parts of it. But if I see kind of sloppy presentation or simple errors, I think that's a missed opportunity, and it's very frustrating.
And finally, do you manage to switch off? And if so, what helps you to do this?
So yeah, so I have 4 kids at home. So
so the answer is no.
Yes. So it depends on your definition of switching off. I definitely is switching gears. So no. So I find that it's a nice balance. And again, nothing else really matters if you don't find time to enjoy your family. And so that's obviously very important. But then when I've enjoyed my family for too long, I really switch off by trying to do a run. So that's probably my one outlet for switching off.
That is amazing. I feel like we know you a lot better now, Patrick, after that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you both.